The DCU, in my opinion, had a Justice League problem in the sense that it was too early to bring a movie of that stature into the fold. I believe that the reason why it happened was due to pure competition and the belief that it could reach MCU levels of plot connectivity and box office draw from the jump. Even after, Snyder was pushed aside for Joss Whedon, we saw an absolute clusterfuck behind the scenes. And that was the beginning of the tarnishing that would be done to the DC brand in the cinematic experience. So, you have the Flash that came and went as its rough CGI, coupled with the distasteful identity in terms of, meaning the unnecessary cameos and all that, ruined the plot and the film as a whole. Which, if only was focused on Barry's relationship with his mother from beginning to end, we would be giving, James Gunn's words of The Flash being one of the best superhero movies of all time a round of applause. I think that would be an important plot device in knowing that The Flash is one of the most interesting characters, in my view, from DC Comics. So all this to say that the DCU already has some errands to fix. The Authority, for example, it was a project in which the seeds were said to be implemented in Superman with the introduction of the Engineer, one of the leaders of this, new superhero collective in the comics. And that project is on hold. And furthermore, we see that Gunn already has a pretty plan laid out. It doesn't involve interconnectivity for a while in this, Gods and Monsters initial chapter. And his plan involves establishing characters in solo projects. Most of them, lately announced, are animation projects. We have a dynamic duo with Jason Todd and Dick Grayson's coexistence being the main focal point of that film. A Mr. Miracle adult animated series focusing on Tom King's run. Even in the schedule for the real kickoff of the DCU, we from Superman in July 2025 to Supergirl in July 2026 to literally Clayface, a Joker type project in September 2026. And it's a project with really no Batman. So Batman and Wonder Woman, they are still being worked on, especially behind the scenes with The Brave and the Bold and Paradise Lost, apparently not being the main projects in which these characters are going to be introduced anymore to the big and small screen, respectively. Meanwhile, fans incessantly push for Matt Reeves to deliver his first draft for The Batman Part 2. As the movie has been delayed multiple times, I believe due to Reeves' personal life, so fans, they feel owed and they want to get a sequel that has already been promised, announced by Warner Bros. Since 2022 and will likely release on time for its date of 2027. However, that is not the main reason. Gunn has, of course, considered this shift, this crossover between Corenswet and Pattinson. But of course, it's his job maybe to cater to the audience and of course to answer these questions on interviews and of course in social media and say that as a studio head, they have considered all options with Peter Safran. So on an interview with Entertainment Weekly this week, he does confirm that. But Gunn seems to be clear always, when he's talking about the DC and, as a whole in terms of its encompassing in TV, film, and media as a whole. He wants to, of course, clear the spectrum into the DCU and what can the DC Elseworlds projects be. So, for example, there's a DCU and DC Elseworlds perspective for the brand to move forward. And let's be honest, the craziest thing that could happen isn't having two Batman on screen together. There was a time not very distant from now where we had Ian Glenn on DC's Titans, Ben Affleck rumored to be on Aquaman and The Lost Kingdom, and then we have, of course, Gotham Knights' non-existent Batman, and of course, Robin Pattinson's Batman. These were all happening at the same time, with the latest multiples instance occurring in 2022. So audiences, despite their superhero fatigue, they were not paying attention to most of the developments in the CW, for example. And I think that, for the last two seasons of Superman and Lois, you can also say the same for Superman in the way that, of course, Tyler Hoechlin's Superman is not always in the debate for, the best live action Superman, because many people just didn't bother to watch it, or they thought that, of course, after the budget was cut, the show became pretty stale in its storylines. So lastly, I believe that Reeves' Batman absence, and I noticed that, it's not the universe absence as a whole. We have, the Penguin that was a major success and one of the front runners for the Emmys later this fall. But his absence, the Batman, Bruce Wayne, it has been pretty much the main reason for this shift on social media, on this discourse. The Batman device trilogy, they sparked a lot of debates after the film's release in 2022. Could it be better from Christopher Nolan's superhero filmmaking masterpiece? But even now, we don't get that kind of discourse anymore because we don't know anything besides the rumors. So this is exactly what would happen, for example, when we see Spider-Man Brand New Day, a film that's coming out in 2026. Except there are more comic book fans than CBM fans leading the discourse and bringing these comparisons to light. We know that it comes at least for DC side, in terms of this arguing, this back and forth. So we know that the Batman 2 takes place in the winter, hence the fan-made blue logos and YouTube thumbnails and of course fan art on Twitter. And people hope that Reeves' Gotham has a distinct color scheme and cinematography feel for each film. Though that excitement has sort of disappeared because other than that, rumors of a Silver Age Clayface, Mr. Freeze, and whether the director wants to tap in that fantastical feel, were other relevant conversations for the Batman Part Two. So that's the issue as well. Reeves has a clear idea that fans used to respect, quote unquote, until, despite most respecting it, even Gunn, they want a crossover. And I believe it's due to recency bias. The Batman Part 2 needs to recapture the audience interest from the first day of set leaks or set photos to actually create a diversion from the Superman mania. So I don't like to say this, but it has to make an instant impact. Of course, it'll survive in the box office. I'm just saying in terms of people wanting to have these unrealistic expectations for a universe that is giving its first steps onto the fold, onto the big screen. So it's the same thing from my last video on Superman. How recency bias can be affecting comic book movie fans on, for example, the Fantastic Four First Steps marketing. So there's a lot of things that could be done. I think that I wouldn't be opposed, but I just don't think it's a great feel right now. I just think that Robert Pattinson, he's always down. I think that he accepted the Batman role gracefully, even after all that Twilight stuff and how it could mean for the legacy of his career. He did accept it gracefully, so I don't think that he would be opposed. I just think that there's a lot of factors that need to be considered. People want to see something that is new, at least comic book fans, and I think that the general audience, despite having this interest for crossovers and as we've seen, big events, big nostalgia, there also has to be a way in terms of creating a genuine feel for new characters, for new looks, for new actors, and I think that type of freshness is what the DCU needs now. So let me know down in the comments what you think should happen. What is the proper move forward? Of course, I just got the news that Matt Reeves is actually going to deliver his first draft on Monday, so I don't think that is a big issue. And the Batman Part 2, I really want to see that movie. I'm really excited. I'm going to be pretty much 21 when that movie releases. But yeah, I'm very, very excited. Let me know in the comments your opinions, what you want to see next on the channel, and I'll see you next.
Depending on like when we came up with the idea to do Penguin, that was something where I had always intended to continue Penguin